I was standing at the edge of the parade field when the major's voice tore through the morning like a door being kicked in. Conversations died instantly. Boots locked in place. Every head turned toward the sound. He was red-faced, chest out, finger aimed at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his boot. He said I had no business in his briefing. Said people like me were supposed to stay quiet, stay useful, stay invisible. Then he laughed, sharp and loud, making sure everyone heard it. What I remember most is not his voice. It is the wind. Cold and steady, dragging dust across my boots and tugging at my sleeves. I remember the silence behind me, a whole formation frozen in place. No one stepped in. No one corrected him. Rank has a way of doing that. It locks people where they stand. I kept my hands behind my back and my eyes forward. I let him talk until his words started to echo back at him. He wanted embarrassment. He wanted a reaction. I gave him neither. He did not know what my orders actually were. And he did not know who had signed his tasking for the next 48 hours. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Captain Lauren Hayes. In the year 2014, I was assigned to Fort Cedar Ridge, a small training and coordination base stretched across the high plains of eastern Wyoming. It was not a place people asked for. It was where you were sent when something was quietly going wrong and higher command wanted answers without noise. Officially, my billet read Logistics Integration Officer, a harmless title. Boring on purpose. It suggested spreadsheets, supply routes, and clipboards. It made people relax. It made them stop asking questions. Unofficially, I worked under direct tasking from senior command, moving from base to base to evaluate leadership fractures before they turned into investigations, court-martials, or folded flags handed to families who never saw it coming. I was not there to take command. I was not there to make friends. I was there to watch how people behaved when they thought no one important was looking. The officer who shouted at me that morning was Major Kyle Benton. Everyone on Fort Cedar Ridge knew his name. Loud voice, perfect posture. Ribbons stacked high on his chest. He walked like the ground owed him something. When he entered a room, conversations died on instinct. People straightened, nodded, agreed. On that base, he was gravity. Schedules bent to him. Opinions curved around him. Silence followed wherever he went. I arrived 3 days before the incident without any announcement, no formation. No handshake tour. I checked in, took my quarters, and disappeared into the background. I sat in the back of briefings. I leaned against walls during rehearsals. I drank bad coffee with non-commissioned officers at hours. No one important cared to visit. You learn more that way. In the motor pool, I heard maintenance requests, discussed in low voices, always followed by the same phrase, "We will push it one more cycle." In the aid station, I watched medics rotate longer shifts than doctrine allowed, telling themselves it was temporary. In the communications room, I saw junior soldiers hesitate before speaking, glancing toward the door like permission had to be granted even when it was empty. None of it was dramatic. That is how real trouble starts. Quiet, incremental, normalized. Training schedules were packed too tightly. Exercises rolled into one another without recovery windows. Equipment inspections were rushed. After action reviews turned into performances instead of corrections. Every small risk was justified by confidence. Every concern was labeled hesitation. The unit was running hot. Too fast, too proud. And no one wanted to be the one who slowed it down. That kind of environment does not explode all at once. It fractures. One missed check. One ignored report. One voice that decides staying silent is safer than being right. I had seen it before. Different bases. Different commanders. Same pattern. My orders were straightforward. Observe. Confirm. Intervene only if necessary. That last line mattered. Intervening too early teaches nothing. Intervening too late costs lives. The timing is the whole job. Major Benton noticed me on the first day, not because I stood out, but because I did not perform. I did not fill space. I did not compete for attention. I listened more than I spoke. To someone like him, that read as weakness. A woman in a plain uniform, no entourage, no visible ego, no appetite for noise. In his world, importance announced itself. Anything quiet could be dismissed. He treated me like an interruption, a paperwork problem, something temporary that would eventually move along. What he never considered was that my silence was deliberate, that every note I took, every pause I allowed, every conversation I let finish without correction was part of a larger picture forming quietly in the background. Leadership failures rarely look dangerous from the inside. They look efficient. They look confident. They look like someone taking charge. By the morning of the briefing, I had already sent one secure update up my chain. No emotion. No accusations. Just timelines, observations, and risk indicators. Enough to make someone higher sit forward in their chair. Major Benton thought he was asserting authority when he raised his voice at me. What he was actually doing was revealing himself. He did not see oversight. He saw challenge, and he responded the only way he knew how. That assumption would cost him far more than pride. The warning signs never arrived all at once. They crept in quietly, disguised as normal friction, a missed radio check blamed on terrain, a delayed report excused by weather, a convoy rehearsal cut short because someone higher up decided saving time mattered more than walking it through again. None of those things triggered alarms on their own. Together, they formed a pattern I had learned to respect. I noticed it first in how people spoke, or, more accurately, how they stopped speaking. A young lieutenant would start a sentence, confident at first, then trail off the moment the major stepped into the room. He would correct himself mid-thought, soften his language, or abandon the point entirely. The message was clear. Say less. Risk less. Survive the room. I spent most of my time with the non-commissioned officers. They are the nervous system of any unit. If something is wrong, they feel it before anyone else. None of them complained outright. They did not have to. Their pauses carried weight. Their eyes lingered on doors. They spoke carefully, choosing words like they were stepping across thin ice. When leadership rules by pressure, honesty becomes dangerous. Truth does not travel upward. It pools quietly at the lowest levels, where it cannot change anything. 2 nights before the incident, a live fire exercise was moved forward on the schedule. Not by hours, by days. The change came late, slipped into the evening update like it was minor. What did not change was medical coverage. Same number of medics, same evacuation plan, same response time assumptions. I flagged it quietly. Not in public, not during a briefing. I spoke to the major afterward and laid it out plainly. The exercise would run hotter than planned. Fatigue was already high. Medical assets were thin. He did not look at the details. He waved his hand like he was brushing away smoke. He said the schedule mattered. He said comfort was not the mission. He said soldiers needed pressure if they were ever going to perform when it counted. Pressure without margin is not leadership. It is gambling with other people's lives and calling it toughness. I documented the conversation. Time, location. His exact wording. I documented others too. Maintenance delays excused by confidence. Training shortcuts justified by experience. Decisions framed as bold when they were really impatient. I did not argue. I did not escalate yet. I wrote everything down. That night, I sent another encrypted update up my chain. Still no emotion. Just facts. A list of indicators. Enough to show trajectory, not accusation. enough to make it clear that if something went wrong, it would not be a surprise. By the morning of the briefing, I already knew the exercise plan had holes. Air coordination had been rushed through confirmation. Ground elements were not aligned on fallback positions. The map looked clean, but only because no one had pressed it hard enough. I stepped into the briefing room anyway. I stood near the back, notebook in hand, uniform unremarkable. I had learned long ago that presence alone can test a leader. A confident one barely notices. An insecure one reacts. Major Benton reacted. He saw me as a problem, not because I challenged him, but because I did not perform deference. I did not laugh at the right moments. I did not nod when he spoke. I listened. When he stopped the briefing and turned the room toward me, I knew what he was doing. He was not correcting a procedural issue. He was asserting dominance. He wanted to remind everyone who mattered and who did not. He wanted to make sure no one mistook quiet observation for authority. He chose me because I was safe to choose. A woman. A support-coded officer. Someone without visible power. What he did not understand was that the power in that room did not belong to the loudest voice. It belonged to the one tracking consequences. As he spoke, I watched the faces around him. Some looked away. Some stared straight ahead. A few tightened their jaws. No one interrupted. That silence told me everything I needed to know. By the time he finished, the exercise was already set in motion. Vehicles staged. Ranges prepped. Medics stretched thin. The system was moving, and systems resist slowing down even when they are wrong. I let him finish. Not because I agreed, but because sometimes the last warning a leader gives is the way they treat the person sent to watch them. And that morning, Major Benton decided to make an example out of me. He did not realize he had already done something far more important. He had confirmed my report. Humiliation is a tool some leaders reach for when they feel their authority slipping. It is fast, it is public, and it sends a message to everyone watching: stay in line, or you are next. Major Benton knew exactly what he was doing when he raised his voice at me. He wanted to strip me of relevance before anyone else could assign it to me. He framed it as discipline. He framed it as protecting order. What he was really protecting was himself. I let him finish. I did not argue. I did not correct him. I did not explain who I was or why I was there. When he dismissed me, I stepped out of the briefing room without a word. A few people glanced after me. Most did not. The room reset around him like it always did. An hour later, the exercise began. From the first movement, the plan started to fray. A vehicle threw a track during repositioning because maintenance had rushed the inspection the night before. The delay forced a platoon to compress its timeline. That compression rippled outward. Comms between two platoons dropped for nearly a minute, brushed off as terrain interference even though the relay position had been flagged earlier in the week. I stood near the control area, watching the dust rise and settle, listening more than looking. The wind shifted, steady and subtle, just enough to push smoke across lanes it was never meant to cross. I had noted that possibility the day before. It had not made it into the final brief. Adjusting for it would have taken time. No one slowed the exercise. Pressure has a way of convincing people to ignore their instincts. Everyone was moving fast, trying to keep up with a schedule that no longer fit reality. Leaders issued corrections without context. Junior soldiers executed without clarity. It was not chaos yet. It was something more dangerous. It was momentum. Then a training round landed too close. It was not catastrophic, not the kind of impact that makes headlines. But it was close enough that everyone felt it. A soldier went down hard, hit by debris and shock. He was conscious, but his leg folded under him when he tried to stand. Pain has a sound to it. Anyone who has heard it knows. The medics were late. Not because they were careless, because they had been pulled to cover another lane when the schedule tightened. The gap was only minutes. Minutes matter. I watched the major react the only way he knew how. He raised his voice. He demanded updates faster than they could be given. He asked questions no one could answer yet. His presence filled the space, but it did not solve anything. It never does. The soldier was stabilized. He would recover. But the exercise had crossed a line, a small one, the kind that comes right before bigger ones. I felt the vibration in my pocket before I heard anything else. It was the secure phone. Higher command does not call in the middle of a live exercise unless something has already reached them. Reports travel faster than people think. Sometimes it is a medic flagging an inconsistency. Sometimes it is a safety officer who has had enough. Sometimes it is the accumulation of quiet updates finally tipping the scale. I stepped away from the noise and answered. They did not ask me what happened. They already knew enough. They asked me where I was standing and what I was seeing. They asked if my earlier indicators were still holding. I answered calmly. I told them exactly what was unfolding. No emotion. No commentary. Just sequence and impact. When I hung up, the exercise was still running. Moments later, another call came in. This time, it was not routed through the command post. It was routed to me directly. They did not call the major. That is the part people misunderstand about authority. It does not announce itself when it shifts. It simply moves, quietly, to the person positioned to carry it. I walked back toward the control area. The major was still issuing orders, his voice sharp with frustration now, not confidence. People were listening, but no one looked settled. The ground beneath his authority had softened, and he did not feel it yet. I waited for the right moment, not to confront him, not to embarrass him. That had already been done, by his own choices. I waited for the moment when intervention would no longer be optional. That moment was seconds away. I walked back onto the field while the major was shouting into a radio that was giving him nothing but static. His words were sharp, clipped, bouncing off equipment and bodies without landing anywhere useful. People were moving, but no one looked certain. Movement without direction always looks like work from a distance. I did not raise my voice. I did not announce myself. I said his name once, evenly, the way you say it when you need someone to stop without escalating anything further. He turned fast, already loaded for another outburst. I saw it in his shoulders, in the set of his jaw. Then his eyes dropped to the phone in my hand. Not the device itself, but the screen, still lit, still connected. Something shifted. Orders do that. They change the air before a word is spoken. I told him the exercise was paused, not suggested. Not delayed, paused. I told him to pull all elements back to holding positions and account for personnel. I kept my voice level and my sentences short. There was no room for interpretation. He demanded to know who authorized it. His voice cracked on the last word, anger fighting with uncertainty. I handed him the phone. He did not speak while he listened. His shoulders lowered a fraction. His stance narrowed. The volume left him completely, like someone had reached inside and turned a dial. When he handed the phone back, he did not meet my eyes. That was the end of the argument. I did not make a speech. I did not explain my role. I did not correct him in front of his people. I stepped into the space he vacated and started issuing instructions the way they should have been given from the start. Medics redeployed first. I pulled them back into proper coverage, redistributed them by risk, not convenience. I confirmed evacuation routes and response times out loud so everyone heard the same reality at the same time. Vehicles were repositioned next. The one that had thrown a track was isolated and secured instead of rushed. The remaining assets were spaced properly, not stacked to meet a timeline that no longer mattered. Maintenance leads were brought in and asked one question at a time, with answers given room to be honest. Communications were rerouted through backup channels that had been ignored all week because they were slower and required patience. I put one non-commissioned officer in charge of nothing but clarity. If a message was not understood, it was repeated. If it conflicted, it was stopped. No one argued. Not because of rank, because the noise was gone. For the first time that week, the base exhaled. You could feel it in the way people moved. Not faster, not slower. Just cleaner. Eyes came up. Voices settled. Decisions landed. The major stood off to the side, silent now, watching the system move without him at the center of it. That is a hard thing for some leaders to see. Authority without presence feels like erasure to people who mistake the two for the same thing. The injured soldier was stabilized and moved properly. His pain was managed. His fear was addressed. He asked what happened, and someone told him the truth without drama. That mattered. I stayed where I was, listening, adjusting, letting the non-commissioned officers do their jobs without interference. When someone raised a concern, it was answered, not dismissed. When a gap was identified, it was closed, not justified. There is a moment in every intervention when you can either prove a point or solve a problem. Proving a point is tempting. It is also useless. Solving the problem is quieter and far more effective. Higher command checked in once more. I gave them an update measured in outcomes, not personalities. The exercise would not resume that day. Training could wait. Recovery could not. When the immediate pressure eased, I finally looked around and took stock of what had changed. The base looked the same. Same dust, same buildings, same equipment. What had shifted was the center of gravity. It had moved away from volume and toward judgment. The major eventually approached me. Not confrontational, not apologetic, just uncertain. He asked what came next. I told him what always comes next: accountability, review, correction. None of it personal, all of it necessary. He nodded once and walked away. I watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with a familiar weight. Intervening always leaves something behind. Pride. Trust. Sometimes both. But as I watched the medics reset their kits and the platoons settle back into order, I knew something else had been left behind too. A base that had been holding its breath had finally been allowed to breathe. The fallout settled in without ceremony. No alarms. No speeches. Just a strange, unfamiliar quiet that pressed down on the base after the exercise was officially shut down. Soldiers stood around longer than necessary, waiting for the correction that usually followed restraint, waiting for someone to tell them they had failed by stopping. That order never came. Instead, something else happened. Safety reports started moving through the system, not buried, not delayed, but acknowledged. Maintenance requests that had been sitting in limbo were approved without argument. Training schedules were adjusted, not canceled, just slowed enough to make sense again. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. Just enough correction to bring the unit back from the edge it had been drifting toward. People noticed. They did not talk about it openly, but behavior changed when fear loosened its grip. Junior leaders asked questions without rehearsing them first. Non-commissioned officers spoke in full sentences instead of fragments. The base did not feel softer, it felt steadier. Major Benton stayed quiet. That silence was new. For a man who had filled every space with his voice, the absence of it was noticeable. Anger without an audience has nowhere to go. It turns inward. It calcifies. He attended required meetings, signed what needed signing, and avoided the places where eyes lingered too long. I did not engage him unless necessary. This phase was not about confrontation. It was about observation. How someone behaves after authority slips tells you more than how they wield it when it is unquestioned. That night, I sat alone in my quarters with a single lamp on and my notebook open. I did not write about the exercise itself. The timelines and corrective actions were already documented. What mattered now was the pattern beneath it all. I wrote about noise, about how volume had replaced judgment, about how urgency had been confused with competence, about how people learned quickly what kind of behavior was rewarded and what kind was punished, even when no one said it out loud. I wrote about the lie of toughness, about how leaders who equate pressure with performance often create environments where truth cannot survive, where small problems are hidden until they become large ones, where silence feels safer than accuracy. None of it was personal. It never is. Systems shape behavior. Leaders shape systems. I knew the recommendation I would make before I finished writing it. I had known it for days. Knowing it did not make it easier. Removing a leader leaves a mark. It fractures routines. It shakes confidence. It creates uncertainty in people who rely on structure to feel safe. No matter how necessary it is, it always costs something. But leaving the wrong leader in place costs more. It costs trust. It costs honesty. Eventually, it costs lives. I closed the notebook and sat there longer than I needed to. The base outside was quiet in the way only working places get at night, generators humming, boots occasionally crunching on gravel. Somewhere, a medic laughed softly at something meant only for one other person. Life continuing, unaware of how close it had come to changing permanently. I thought about the soldier who went down, how close the margin had been, how easily the story could have ended differently if momentum had won. People like to believe disasters announce themselves. They do not. They arrive disguised as confidence. Before turning in, I sent my final assessment up the chain. It was longer than the previous ones, not accusatory, not emotional, just thorough. I attached supporting notes, direct quotes, observations that could not be dismissed as opinion. When I hit send, there was no relief, just a settling acceptance. Decisions like this are never about one person. They are about everyone downstream from them. The privates who assume orders are safe. The medics who trust coverage will be there. The families who believe training will not turn into tragedy. I lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the base breathe in its sleep. Tomorrow would bring meetings, reviews, consequences that would ripple outward in ways most people would never see. Leadership changes never feel like victory. They feel like responsibility finally catching up. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought stayed with me, steady and uncomfortably clear. The loudest voice on a base is rarely the one holding it together. And the quiet after intervention is not emptiness. It is what stability sounds like when fear finally lets go. The next morning unfolded without ceremony. No formation was called. No explanation was offered to the ranks. There were no speeches about accountability or lessons learned. Orders came down the same way they always do when leadership wants change without spectacle. Quiet, direct, final. Major Benton was relieved of command. A transfer vehicle rolled through the gate just after first light, tires crunching over gravel loud in the early stillness. He packed his gear without assistance. No one hovered. No one asked questions. The base carried on around him, deliberately busy, as if movement itself could absorb the weight of what was happening. I stood near the operations building when he walked past. He did not look at me. That was not avoidance out of shame or anger. It was something closer to disorientation. Leaders who build their identity on volume struggle when silence replaces it. Without an audience, they are forced to confront themselves, and not everyone is prepared for that. He paused once near the vehicle, scanning the familiar outlines of the base, like he was trying to reconcile what he remembered with what it had become overnight. Then he climbed in, the door closed, and he was gone. There was no visible reaction, no cheers, no whispered conversations, just a subtle loosening that spread through the people who remained. Shoulders dropped, breathing slowed. A few glances were exchanged, not celebratory, just acknowledging that something heavy had moved on. Relief is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It settles quietly into posture and tone. It shows up in the way people speak without checking who is listening, in how junior leaders stop rehearsing their words before saying them, and how non-commissioned officers return to correcting problems instead of managing personalities. I saw it in the motor pool first. Maintenance teams worked without rushing, taking the extra minutes they had been denying themselves. In the aid station, medics reset coverage with care instead of improvisation. In briefings, questions were asked and answered fully, without anyone feeling the need to perform. No one thanked me. No one needed to. By midday, the base had found a new rhythm. Not slower, just honest. Training plans were rewritten with margins built back in. Safety officers were listened to instead of tolerated. Corrections were made without someone needing to raise their voice to make them stick. I spent the morning sitting in, observing, saying very little. This was not the time to imprint myself on the unit. My role was nearly finished. What mattered now was whether the system would hold once pressure returned. It did. People forget that most soldiers do not crave perfect leadership. They crave predictable leadership. Leadership that does not make them guess which version of a commander they are going to get on any given day. Leadership that allows them to focus on their jobs instead of surviving the mood of the room. I watched the young lieutenant brief his platoon that afternoon. He spoke clearly. He paused to check understanding. When a sergeant corrected a detail, the lieutenant nodded and adjusted without defensiveness. It was a small thing. It mattered. I thought about the morning on the parade field, about the way silence had frozen everyone in place, about how authority wielded carelessly teaches people to disappear. What replaced it was not softness. It was trust. Before I left the base, I walked the perimeter one last time. The wind was the same as it had been that morning, cold, steady, carrying dust across the ground. Nothing about the environment had changed, only the way people moved within it. That is how you know a decision was right, when the place feels safer without anyone needing to say it out loud. I never spoke to Major Benton again. I do not know where he went next or what he learned from the experience. That was not mine to track. What stayed with me instead were the faces of the people who remained. Not gratitude, not triumph. Just the quiet recognition that they could do their jobs without bracing for impact. Relief is survival recognizing itself. It is the absence of dread. It is the return of breath. It is a unit remembering that leadership is meant to steady the ground, not shake it. And as I walked away from Fort Cedar Ridge that afternoon, I knew the most important change had already taken hold. The base no longer mistook noise for strength, and the people who served there no longer had to choose silence to stay safe. I stayed on the base another week, long enough to see whether the change would hold once the immediate tension faded. Anyone can behave differently for a day or two. What matters is what people do when no one is watching for mistakes anymore. The shift showed up in small, honest ways. Junior leaders started speaking up without rehearsing every sentence in their heads. In briefings, questions were asked before problems turned into workarounds. When someone did not understand an order, they said so instead of nodding and hoping it would sort itself out later. The room felt slower, but not weaker. Slower in the way that careful people move. In the aid station, coverage finally matched reality. Medics rotated off shifts on time. Supplies were replenished instead of rationed. I watched a young medic walk through a scenario twice because she wanted to be sure, not because anyone was rushing her. Confidence grows when people are allowed to prepare instead of perform. Training returned to discipline instead of spectacle. Live fire schedules were adjusted to match fatigue levels. After action reviews stopped being theater and started being honest. Mistakes were named plainly, without someone searching for a scapegoat to protect themselves. Corrections stuck because they made sense. No one thanked me. Not publicly, not privately. That was how it should be. Oversight is not meant to collect gratitude. If people are thanking you, it usually means something else has gone wrong. I kept my distance, sat in when invited, listened more than I spoke. When someone asked for input, I gave it directly and moved on. This was their base again, not mine. I paid attention to what did not happen. No flare-ups. No quiet pushback. No leader trying to reassert control through intimidation. The system held, which meant the people inside it had been ready for change long before it arrived. On my last day, I packed early and walked the base one final time. The morning was clear, the same steady wind rolling across the open ground. The place felt ordinary again. That is the highest compliment you can give a unit. Ordinary means predictable. Ordinary means safe. As I was heading back toward my quarters, a staff sergeant caught up with me near the motor pool. He did not salute right away. He looked like he was deciding whether to speak at all. He handed me a folded piece of paper. He said it was nothing official, just a list. Issues he had noticed over the past year. Training gaps, maintenance shortcuts. Things that worried him but never seemed worth the risk of saying out loud before. He told me he was planning to bring them up now. Through the proper channels, in the open. He did not ask me to read it. He did not ask me to fix anything. He just wanted me to know that the list existed. I held the paper for a moment, feeling the weight of it. It was light. It always is. The weight is not in the paper. It is in the fear that kept it folded for so long. I handed it back to him and told him he should bring it forward. I told him that was his job, not mine. He nodded once, sharp and certain, and walked back to his people. That moment mattered more than any briefing, any report, any decision signed at a higher level. A leader willing to speak honestly in the open is the real measure of a healthy unit, not speeches. Not confidence, not noise. When I left Fort Cedar Ridge that afternoon, no one watched me go. No one needed to. The work there was finished. I drove out past the gate, past the range roads and low buildings, and felt the familiar sense of release that comes when responsibility is handed back where it belongs. Not relief. Responsibility does not vanish. It just shifts. What stayed with me was not the confrontation on the parade field or the quiet removal of a major. It was a folded piece of paper and a man who finally felt safe enough to unfold it. That is how you know something real has changed. Not when authority is displayed, but when truth is no longer afraid to show itself. I left Fort Cedar Ridge before dawn, the way I arrived. No send-off. No handshakes. No ceremony. The gate light washed over the hood of my vehicle, then disappeared behind me. That is how this kind of work is supposed to end. If it is done right, nothing needs to be said. Leadership is not volume. It is not presence. It is not fear dressed up as confidence. Leadership is the willingness to be accountable when things go wrong and disciplined enough to listen before they do. It is choosing judgment over ego when the cost of being wrong is carried by someone else. That major humiliated me in public because he believed authority lived in noise. He believed control came from being seen and heard. He never realized the person he dismissed was not there to serve him, impress him, or challenge him. I was there to measure him. Quietly, completely. I still think about that morning sometimes. About the way the air froze when he spoke. About how close the situation came to tipping past recovery. Most failures do not begin with explosions or alarms. They begin with someone deciding not to speak up because the room does not feel safe enough for the truth. I tell this story because silence is often misunderstood. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is discipline. Sometimes it is restraint. Sometimes it is a professional waiting for the right moment to act so that the cost is smaller and the outcome matters. The loudest voice is rarely the one holding things together, and the people who save the most lives are often the ones you barely notice at all. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.